government in the broadest terms. Three groups of people: voters, politicians, and bureaucrats. And we as a society encounter this problem that we want to solve. And the problem, let's suppose, is that some workers don't earn a living wage. And so the way we imagine government works when we say to the government, fix this problem, is the following. We have the voters whose goal it is to help all people earn a living wage. And the way they go about doing that is by voting for politicians who support living wage laws. Then we have the politicians, and we imagine that their goal is to do what's in the best interest of society. And how do they go about doing that? By enacting and voting for living wage laws. Then finally, we have the bureaucrats, who we call the public servants. Their goal, we imagine, is to serve the public. And the way they go about serving the public in this instance is by executing these living wage laws for the good of the poor. And what we imagine happens is unicorns and rainbows, all these wonderful things that will occur if we simply say to the government, fix this problem. Now let's look at the government through the eyes of a public choice economist. A public choice economist looks at these three groups, voters, politicians, and bureaucrats, and understands that these are human beings who face limitations and they have desires. So let's start with the voter. In the view of a public choice economist, the public choice economist says, here's a voter, he's a human being, what's his goal? Well, the goal of all human beings is to maximize their happiness. Now, some people's happiness comes from consuming things, collecting lots of money, lots of stuff. Other people's happiness comes from helping others, from doing good. Economists don't make any judgment as to what it is that makes you happy. We simply say that people pursue the things that make them happy. So here are the voters. Their goal is to maximize their happiness. How do they go about doing that? They will become informed and they will vote if the benefit of doing so exceeds the cost. Now we have the politicians. The politicians also are human beings, which means their goal is to maximize their happiness. And how do they go about maximizing their happiness? By attracting at least 50% of the voters. If the politician does not attract 50% of the voters to vote for him, he's no longer a politician, he's now something else. So the politicians that persist will be the ones
who attract I'm going to go up on the hill
to attract 50% of the voters.
And if nobody comes with me, I'm going to duck into a corner and hide.
Just like the rest, their goal is to maximize their happiness.
But I go on the hill unless, it's a
flag
rally. Should I reverse? Look at this. I'm at the bottom of the hill. I think I'll just
and what actually emerges.
Should I just hope that they are going to go up the hill?
Imagine when we say
I'm going to go harass the flag point.
Now you might say, yes, but we live in a democracy, and the whole point of a democracy is to guard against this selfish behavior. All we have to do is vote in better people, and if we vote in better people, we can have our unicorns and rainbows back. Well, let's think this through for a moment. Think about voter behavior in a democracy. Suppose we have two groups of people. A large group of people over here, we'll call this Group A, and a smaller group of people, Group B. And I'm going to propose a law for this group of people. And the law goes like this. We will take $10 from every person in Group A, burn half of it, and whatever's left we'll give to the people in Group B. Now the question is, how are people going to vote on this proposed law? Let's start out with a simpler question. Who wants to vote at all? So if I ask the people in Group A and Group B, would you like to vote for or against this law? All of them will raise their hands and say, yes, we would like to vote. And what's the outcome of the vote? Well, the outcome of the vote is the proposed law will be defeated. It will be defeated. Why? Because although it's great for the people in Group B, they'll all vote for it, there are a small number of people. The people in Group A, this law is bad for them. They outnumber the people in Group B. They're going to vote against it. And so consequently,
all right, now I just gotta wait.
That raises another question, which is this good for society? And clearly it is. This is a stupid law. It should be defeated. And in defeating it, society is better off. This thought experiment is normally how people imagine voter behavior in a democracy working. In fact, it's missing an important point. And the important point it's missing is what economists call the information and the voting cost. And information and voting cost is the cost, maybe in terms of money, maybe in terms of time and energy or effort, but it's the cost of, first, being aware that there's a vote pending. Two, reading up or investigating and finding out what it is that's under consideration. Three, reading this proposed law and deciding whether in the end you think this is good for you or bad for you. deciding how you're going to vote, and then finally getting up out of your chair, going to the voting place, voting.
All right, let's move up.
All of that is costly, sometimes in terms of dollars, sometimes in terms of money, but it's costly. And in our thought experiment, what we'll do is simulate this information voting cost with a $20 fee. So I'm going to propose the same law for society. We're going to take $10 from everyone in Group A. We're going to burn half of it. We're going to give what's left to Group B.
All right.
And the people can vote for or against. I don't care how they vote. But to vote at all, you must pay $20. That $20 represents the information voting cost. Now, ask yourself, who is going to want to vote in this instance? Well, the people in Group B clearly are going to want to vote. They stand to gain a lot from this law. And although they have to pay $20 to vote, what they stand to gain exceeds the $20 they have to pay, and therefore they will be interested in voting. But look at the people in Group A. The people in Group A each have to pay $10 if this law is passed. But the cost of fighting the law actually exceeds the cost of living with it. So the people in Group A have a strong incentive not to vote at all. And so what happens? Well, what happens is, in our thought experiment, this law passes unanimously. The only people who turn up to vote are the people in Group B, and the people in Group B unanimously vote for it, and the law passes unanimously. Is society better off? No, society is actually worse off. This is a bad law, and yet this is something that has emerged from the democratic process once you understand that an information and voting cost is a real thing.
Nice.
Now, this is just a thought experiment, but you see this all over the place. Take, for example, sugar. There's a sugar tariff. All sugar that comes into the United States has a tariff attached to it. Therefore, when you buy sugar, you pay more than you would otherwise. Well, who benefits from this? The people who benefit are American sugar producers. It turns out sugar requires an equatorial environment to grow. And so to grow sugar in the United States, you have to build these large buildings and simulate an equatorial environment. This is all very costly. And when you're done, the cost of growing sugar in the United States ends up being much higher than the cost of growing sugar in more equatorial environments. Consequently, when American sugar producers try to compete with foreign sugar producers, they can't. Foreign sugar producers can produce sugar at a lower cost. And so the American sugar producers have an incentive to go to Congress and say, would you please impose a tariff on imported sugar so we can compete? And Congress, made up of politicians who are looking to get elected, turn to the electorate and say, hey, what do you think about this? And what the politicians see are basically—
all right, I'm just going to go straight ahead to my appointed
a large group of
area
who are not sugar producers, who have other concerns in their lives.
Yeah, the loser team,
reading the
they all end up
involved in
sitting right here instead of going down here. I'm going to head down here and hope that they'll come with me.
And so when the politicians turns to them and says,
you have a loser team, they'll all go one way or the other, or else they'll leave this middle one open. Somebody will screw something up.
Tends to be higher than the benefit they perceive they would get from paying attention. Meanwhile, the sugar producers in the United States are very interested in this law because they stand to gain a lot. So when the politician says, what do you think about this? All the sugar producers and the people who work for them and the people they buy things from all stand up and say, yes, this is a good idea. Let's pass this law. And I, as the politician, see then this sea of voters, one group of whom isn't even paying attention because they don't think it's worth their time, and another group who is intensely paying attention and is interested in my passing this thing.
There they go.
And so I have a strong incentive now to pass this law.
There they go.
And therefore, we end up with a sugar tariff.
Knuckleheads,
That's just in the case
you
of
morons.
tariffs on sugar. Now,
all right, we're not going to win this one.
All sorts of industries and all sorts of special interest groups.
Unless I get a group come up here.
Benefits from legislation.
We'll have to battle hard to win this one.
Find that this information voting cost is more than simply just a trick in a thought experiment. It's something that actually pervades the democratic process.
What are they going to do there? Why are y'all sitting there? 6 guys going up the middle?
Economists call concentrate, benefit, and disperse cost. In this case, the benefit
5
of the
guys
law,
in the middle,
taking the
6
$10
guys
from everybody in Group A and giving it to Group B.
Churchill's hiding.
Law
Come on,
concentrated
Churchill, are you serious?
Small number of people. That's the people in Group B.
Knucklehead.
The cost is dispersed over many, many people. Those are the
There's
people in
our-
Group A. And so consequently, the way we
There's our
imagine
citizen.
lawmaking works is that we look at the law, and if the benefits of the law exceed the cost of the law,
You're
the law
going to go
gets
up
passed.
there, huh?
And in fact, that's not the way it works. We look at the law, and if the benefit per capita benefit per person who's benefited, is larger than the benefit than the cost per person. The cost per person on whom the costs are imposed. If that benefit per person exceeds the cost per person, then the law gets passed.
Damn, I
even if
can't
the total
penetrate
benefit
him.
is small and the total cost
Alright.
is large. The
Alright,
way
Sturf,
voters
go on up
end
there and I'll
up
follow.
behaving is
Go.
that they exhibit what we call rational
Alright.
ignorance. And rational
Alright,
ignorance
let's do
means
this.
simply that
Let's
the
do this,
voters are
bitch.
ignorant of the law, and it is perfectly rational for them to be so. Because it doesn't make sense that
Holy
they would
shit.
spend their
Oh,
effort
guy almost
figuring
got
out
a shot
what
into
this law
him.
says and fighting it, because to do so is actually more costly.
I clicked the mouse, but it didn't go.
In the first place.
Whatever, I don't care.
Now you
That was
might
stupid.
say,
My
yes,
team was
but
stupid.
we live in a
Stupid
republic,
team,
not a
lame.
democracy. The whole point of a republic
Cowards.
is to get around this information voting cost. And the way we get around it is by electing representatives. We understand that the
Now I
voters
have to
don't have
choose
the
another
time, or
tank.
the energy, or the knowledge
M4 is
to
pretty good.
study
M4
legislation.
A3 E8 is
Information
pretty
voting cost
fun.
is high. Therefore,
You make more
the
money
voters
with the ones in
will hire
orange.
somebody
Those are
to do that
purchased
for
for
them.
real
We call
dollars.
this person a representative.
I'll try the Sherman
So
for
you
a
can
battle.
imagine
I'm
the
just
people in
checking.
Roubaix hiring representatives to
Research
represent
is
them.
all good.
And the people in
Okay.
UP hiring representatives to represent them. And these representatives then will hash out whether this law is a good idea or not and vote on behalf of the people in the way the people would vote if they had the time and the energy to study the law themselves. Well, that's an interesting idea, but it raises a problem in its own, which is how do
Okay.
we divide
Lower
our
tier.
populace into districts and assign
M4.
representatives to
Should I
them.
go town?
What we would like is
I'm gonna
that
wait.
we
I'm gonna see
assign
who goes zero
representatives
line.
in an
If there's enough
electorally
people going
fair
zero
way.
line, then
And
I'm gonna
here's what
go
I mean by
town.
that. Let's suppose
If there's a hole
we
somewhere,
have
I'll try to plug the
60% of
hole. But the
population
zero line
who
is very
likes
important.
and 40% of the
And a lot of
population
people are
likes
cowards
stuff.
on the zero line.
If we were to establish representatives to represent this population, we would want the representative body, the Congress, to be comprised of 60% green representatives and 40% red representatives. That is, we want the Congress to look like the population. Now, one way to do that is something like the following. We put these 10 households in a district, and we say, you 10 households, you get to elect a representative. What kind of representative would you like? And these 10 households are all green, so if you ask them, they will say, we would like a green representative. Then we put these 10 households in a district, and we ask them, and they're green, they would also like a green representative, as will these 10 households. Now, these 10 households are all red. If we ask them what kind of representative they would like, they'll say,
All right,
give us a
I'm
red
gonna go
representative,
zero
and
line.
similarly will these 10 households.
T67,
So
good.
when you're done,
Me and
allocating
T67. M7 is gonna be dead by the
you
time we
end
get
up
over
with
there.
fair representation. 60% of the population is green, 40% red. 60% of the representatives are green, 40% red. That works. Maybe. What happens when these people you have elected have the ability to redraw
T37, T78. We got a gang coming up over here. We need more guys in the middle.
Instead of dividing the congressional
We're gonna have to
districts
move
like
this
I told you,
train.
we do it differently.
Why did you guys
We
all
put
wait
these
so long
10
to come?
households in the district.
Morons.
And we ask them, what sort of
Funnest thing about
representative
this
would you like?
game is
Well, these people
telling
would like
everybody
to
they're
have a green
morons all the
representative. These
time.
people would like to have a red representative. This district is mostly green. So if we ask this district, they will say, give us a green representative. And if I put these 10 households in the district, they will also elect a green representative, as will those 10 households, those 10, and those 10. And notice what's happened now.
New crew,
By
untrained
altering
crews,
how we
real
define the
slow to
congressional
aim in there.
districts, we have completely silenced the minority. The Reds' households now have no representation in Congress at all. And if you
See,
think
there's
that's
an SU
perverse,
sitting back there.
suppose we were to put
Right
these 10
in
households
them
the
trees right
district.
there.
Now, these 10 households are mostly red. So if we ask them what kind of representative would you like,
All
they will
right.
say, give us a red
Rough
representative.
times.
And if we put these 10 households in the district, they'll similarly elect a red representative. Now, if we put those 10 households in the district, they're almost
What's
entirely
T37
green.
gonna do?
They'll elect a green representative, as will those 10 households. And
All right,
finally,
hold
here's our
that
last
side,
district.
you coward. He's gonna
10 households, they'll elect a red
he's
representative.
gonna leave.
And
They're
look
gonna
what's
take
happened.
that side.
We have taken the same population we had before, redistricted it, and
I
now
should have
we
kept my
have
cover
a
better. I'm not very. That's a
representation
stupid tank.
in
I don't play that
Congress
tank very
of a
much.
minority of the population. So the moral of the story is the information and voting cost means
That guy's
we
gonna
will
leave
have a
that
tendency
side.
to
One guy's
pass
gonna be
laws
over there.
that are
He'll
bad
get
for
killed. They're gonna
society
take that side. They're gonna surround
because
us. We're gonna
they
lose that one.
benefit a small group of people.
It's
And
okay.
the
I'm
cost
over it.
is spread
I'm gonna
out
play the
over
Matilda,
so many
which is
people
the
that it's not worth
slowest
a large number of people's
tank
time
in
to
this
figure out what
game.
this law is and to fight
The
it.
slowest
And
tank
so
in the
we
game.
think maybe we should have instead
Now,
of
it has an
representative
amazing gun.
government.
Not
and the
amazing. It
problem
has
with
an
representative
interesting
government
gun. It
is
has a
depends
fun
on
gun.
how we
It's a
draw
pea shooter, but
different
it
lines,
reloads
we can
fast.
have fair representation.
You can do some damage, and
Or the
especially if you're
problem
top
is
tier in the
we
round,
can
you can
silence
have
the
fun.
minority or give
But
the
it's
minority
a
majority
cheap,
representation.
stupid tank, and
This
it's
is
for
an
beginners and
example of
newbies who don't know
what's
what they're
many
doing.
consider to be the most
And I've got it. I had
gerrymandered
it on
state
another
in the
account. I sold it.
country. Gerrymandering, of course, is altering congressional district
So now this is
lines
my only
to benefit
Matilda.
the party in
So
power.
when I
In
feel
North
nostalgic and I want to
Carolina,
play the old Matilda, because
congressional
when I started out,
district,
I didn't have a lot of
someone
tanks.
taking the time to think very
So I had to
carefully
play. Oh, here I
how
am, top
to
tier.
draw these congressional district lines to give more
And where? Oh,
representation
this
to
is a
whatever
hell of a map. All
party it
right.
is that was in power.
All right. You have to have a good team on this map. I'm going to go to the right. Try to hold that forest.
Or give majority representation to a minority of the population.
Try to get through
Now
that
that's
forest.
voters.
This is a
only one
flag
of these
rally.
groups that we
Shit.
mentioned when we talk about government. Let's talk about politicians' behavior.
being a Matilda in a flag rally. I hate the Matilda. Why did I press play in this tank?
Picture the voters, and suppose the voters are thinking about a level of government service. And this might be something like the military or public education or public transportation, something like that. And you can imagine amongst all the voters, there's a lot of people who would like a low level of this government service. And you can imagine as well, there's another large body of voters who would like a high level of this government service. And you could imagine perhaps there's a smaller number who would like a low to medium level of this government service.
Me and Panzer
IV.
IV.
Like a medium to high.
This is not looking good.
Imagine that the fewest number of voters of all.
Yeah, this is not looking good.
A medium level of this government service.
This is basically the end of
now,
the forest here.
Not all preferences for government
Unless we have
service
scouts
way,
coming in these trees, helping us and flushing this forest
There
out.
are a large number of
We are dead. They're going to surround us and shoot us in the back. And I'm going to be the first one dead.
Military that's devoted strictly to defending our borders. And then we have a large number of people who believe that we should bomb democracy.
We'll just wait a second. I just want to see them come out of those trees.
Are many people
we'll just wait a second here.
Believe we should have
it's a coward group. They're going to be surrounded and shot at from behind.
So what you typically get with government service is this binary split of the voters between those who would like a small amount of the government service and those who would like a large amount. Now, superimpose on top of these voters a couple of politicians. And there's this guy. He's running for office. And remember, his goal is to get elected.
There it comes.
And he says to the voters, look, if you elect me, I will provide you with this level of government service. And his opponent comes along
they're
and
come around behind
me and I'll provide you with this level of government service.
That's the Matilda, stupid damn tank.
Politicians. Well, these people like the guy on the left because the guy on the left is promised to deliver exactly the level of government service they want. These people, like
this guy who's talking, forgets that we could engineer a government without interference in the economy. He just takes it as a metaphysical fact that the government will interfere in the economy, and we have to determine how to deal with that fact.
He's going to provide a level of government service that they don't like, but is better than the level of government service the other guy's offering. So when I ask these voters, who are you going to vote for? These people vote for the guy on the left, and all of those people will vote for the guy on the right.
So for him, voting is the metaphysical given.
The guy on the left is aware that this is how the voters are perceiving the two candidates, and he will alter his position. He'll come out and say, I have been consistently misrepresented in the media. I have never been for a low level of government service. I have always been for this level of government service. And now what happens? The voters rethink their positions. These people think that this guy is going to offer the level of government service they like the best. These people think this guy is going to offer the level of government service they like the best. So what does the guy on the left do? The guy on the left holds a press conference and says, if you elect me, I promise you I will provide this level of government service. And now what happens?
Convoy on the zero line. Hold the town, boys.
This guy, and you end up
only a good team does it. Everybody wants to go to town. I'm going to go to town and be a bully.
We get the level of government service that the least number of people wanted. This effect occurs so frequently, economists have given it a name.
We got a good team coming. Look at these boys.
And the median voter theorem says majority voting will yield the median voter's preference.
Tier 5 Crusader. Crusaders are junk. There's a Tier 2 Crusader that's good. Other than that, they're junk.
So you see here, for example, why, if you pick any American at random, and ask them, what do you think
Everything
about
after
public
tier
education in
2
the
is
United
junk.
States? Invariably, they will say, we have a serious problem with public education. Almost all Americans will say that. But they'll say it for two different reasons. Half of them will say it because they believe that we're spending too much on public education, we should be spending a lot less. And the other half of them are going to say it because they believe we're spending too little on public education, should spend a lot more. And what we're actually doing
Okay,
is
why is that
spending the
59
amount
up here so
that
quick?
satisfies the median voter,
Is it
which
because
tends
he's
to be the amount that the least number of people are interested in.
alone and
So the
nobody's
conclusion with politicians is, look, they don't seek the
coming
common
with?
good. They seek to get elected. And that's not to say that there are no politicians who care about it. It's the following.
Excuse me.
If you give me two politicians who are equal in every way except one, this guy's primary motivation is to seek the common good.
What
Whereas
do you
this
care
guy's
about what the
primary
politician's
motivation is
going to do?
get
Just what matters is what the politician's able to
elected.
do.
And consequently,
Like
on
if you're
average,
counting on
politicians
just
who
analyzing
are
what the politician's going to do, I
primary
mean, you're already hit.
is to get elected.
Just say we don't allow
And
the
seeking the
politician
common
to
good
do
is
certain
something
things
further down the
because
list.
we don't want them to do those things.
So how do politicians go about getting elected? They seek to satisfy the median voter, even if the median voter is a small portion of the population. So we've seen how voters behave through the eyes of a public choice economist. We've seen how politicians behave through the eyes of a public choice economist. Let's now think about how bureaucrats behave. This is the county courthouse in the town I live in. If you have any business with the county,
All right, so it's just an analysis of our current culture today. I haven't been listening to it too closely, so if my analysis doesn't fit, that's fine. I listen to things, if I find them
all the time except when it's snowing.
substantive, I'll listen to them 2 or 3 times.
This dark area is an underground
Make sure I
garage,
get 'em.
which is quite nice.
Make sure I get every bit of anything out of them.
Your car doesn't get wet or snowed on. There's an elevator to go up to where you need to go and do whatever business you do, come back down. If you're ever in this town and you have business with the county government and you go here and you go down the street and you turn to go into this parking garage, you'll see inside there a sign, and the sign says parking for courthouse employees only. If you're there as a citizen to do business with the county, you have to park somewhere else. Right? Where? I don't know. There's a couple places here, you go down the street there, right? But this parking, the nice stuff, is reserved for the people who work in the building. Now think about this. Have you ever gone to a store
Nice.
and seen
Look at these
all
beautiful
the
events
prime
that are
parking
happening here.
out front
Look at this
close to the
business.
door is reserved
I'm going to
for
die
people
very
who work
quickly.
there.
Oh, that's, yep, I knew I was going to die, but
Typically,
I just wanted to
these
push the
spaces are
line
reserved
forward
for
so those
handicapped
cowards didn't stop. Oh, there's an M4 behind the lines. That's not good. We could end up.
Don't park near the building.
Town looked like it had collapsed at the last glance. That looked like we might lose it. Earlier, we lost that Murovonka
And why
with the
do they
Black
do that?
Prince. I knew we were going to get defeated in that. I knew it. Fucking cowards.
Businesses do that. not
Okay, you know,
because
let's
the
see
manager
if
of
we
the
can get a
business is
battle in a
somehow
tier
more
2 because
altruistic than the people who work at the courthouse.
it's not that
because
late.
they
Late
think
at night,
business
you
is
can't get
smarter
them.
than people who work at the
Vickers
courthouse. They're the same
Mark
brand of
E
Homo
Type
sapien
B.
in both instances.
It's one of my
public sector, the private
favorite
sector.
tanks
The
of all
difference is one
time.
in motivation.
That and the L640, an
In the
Italian,
case
little
of the
Italian number.
business, if I don't make it as easy as possible for you to come to my store and to transact business with me, you will go elsewhere, and I'll lose your business. That's not
Unless you have high quality
courthouse.
goods, people climb over hills and mountains and dales to get to your stuff. They'll stand in long lines to buy an Apple computer when they could just go to Best Buy and get. So he's wrong.
If I have parking tickets I have to pay, I have to go here. I can't go to some other county courthouse. In fact, I don't even have the option to not go at all. They will send a nice gentleman with guns and handcuffs and force me to come and do business with them. The reason you
Okay.
get things
On
like
this map, it's always about the canyon over to the side. If we get a big team, we trounce them. If we get a small team, we just try to hold them. It's always about the canyon.
Because I have no choice but to deal with them. The people in the private sector have
The
to
river
make
road
decisions
over
in their
here
lives because
is very
I have
easy
deal
to
with them
hold
well.
with 1 or 2 good
So I
artillery
had to renew my
pieces
license recently, and in
and maybe a
Pennsylvania,
scout.
you
2 to
get
3
this
guys at
thing
the
in the
most.
mail
Well, we've only
that
sent the
says,
BT-7
Pennsylvania
over. I'm a
is
little
now-
worried
driver's
about that.
license
This is
services are
tier
now
2.
online.
Everybody here is noobs and they're all lame and stupid and they don't know what they're doing.
Right. The web address, they couldn't even be bothered to buy something like, renewyourlicense.com. It's dmv.state.pa.us. Okay, fine, whatever. This is a nice web address. I can go here. I can renew my driver's license. So I go to a browser. I type this thing in. And what do I see? I see this. There are 36 links on this page. And so I spend about 5 minutes clicking and backing out and clicking and backing out.
All right, that's going to be a rough one because I'm tier 2 and there's tier 3s.
Driver's license, photo ID. So fine, I'm going to click on this thing and I'm going to renew my driver's license. You click on that link and you go here. And here you have another 25 or 30 links, and again another 5 minutes of clicking and backing out.
Cruiser 3's clueless while you're sitting in the open.
This is the link I want. Renewing your
Either move
driver's
forward
license.
or
Okay,
hide.
good. I'm going to click on
Why
this.
were you sitting
My
in the
driver's
open,
license.
dude? You could have been shot by him.
You click on that link and you go here. This says, renewing your non-commercial driver's license. I don't know what all that means, but we have step number 1. This is good news. This means something's happening. Step number 1, receive an invitation to renew DL60A/DL60R or obtain form DL143. I don't know what that means. Imagine that you have to buy a screwdriver.
All right,
and you go to
how are my boys behind doing?
What normally happens?
And plugging, this is a big group that they've sent.
Say, hello, I'd like to buy a screwdriver. And if they're not busy,
my
they'll
tank's
often
so
come out
slow.
and counter and say, well, come with me this way.
I don't like pulling out for shots like this.
Screwdrivers, maybe you need screws. And
All right, he's going out. There we go. We got some protection there.
Maybe you want to buy a hammer. They will do everything they can to make
I got one in out of 4, but he toasted me. Damn it. All right, my boys behind are getting wrecked. Oh, crud, we're wrecked. We are wrecked.
And you go to Home Depot and you say, hello, I'd like to buy a screwdriver.
Oh, crud. Come on. Oh, I didn't even get a shot off. Stupid mouse hit my keyboard. All right.
Right, what do? You leave, you go somewhere else.
All right, that was fun.
Pennsylvania.
I knew that was going to be rough.
If I want
We're getting smeared. My team is
I
getting
have no
smeared.
option except to deal with these people.
That's
All
tier
right.
2.
I still don't know what DL60A/DL60R is. I'm going to
One more tier 2 battle, then I'm going to go back to the tier 6. L640. I love this little machine gun.
Return
This
the
baby.
complete application with a check or money order.
Cute
made
little
payable
machine
to PennDOT, that's Pennsylvania Department of Transportation.
I don't play this game seriously. There's people down here that get really mad at me because I don't play it seriously. I just play it like oh, I'm in a Soviet tank now. Now I'm in a Chinese tank. I don't care.
I have a checkbook.
I think more about history while I'm playing it than I think about the strategy that I ought to be probably
So I get out my check and I'm writing the check.
I'm probably actually better at strategies than the rest of them. I don't know.
He says, what are you doing?
Maybe I spend more time thinking about strategy. I don't know.
He says, what's a check?
But I don't care about it. I know that there's
Anywhere
stat
else on the
people, stat
When you want to buy
patterns
something
and
online,
stuff.
what
I'm
do?
just
You
an
go there and they'll
obnoxious
take your
noob
credit
according to
card
all of
or
them.
a debit card, or you could pay with PayPal. You even find some places will take things like Bitcoin.
See, this is the type
These
of wait
people want a
time
check.
you're up
All
to.
right, fine. I'll write them a check. Step number 3.
Oh, that's not bad.
A camera
45
card will be
seconds.
mailed. You
It can go
should
4 or
receive it
5
in
minutes
7
and then
to 10
reset, and
working
you have to try
after
again.
the form is processed. Once you receive your camera card, you take it with appropriate identification to the
When that
driver's
happens,
license
sometimes I
center.
get
Will
to
it give you
painting,
the driver's
And then
license?
when I do get
Now,
into battle, I just
step back
press
and
quit or
imagine what
something.
just
Just
happened.
get out of it and continue my painting.
They sent me.
Okay,
in
this is the
mail,
canyon
a
one
piece
we
of
just
paper.
played, but from
I
the
go to the
other
web
end.
to a browser,
So
and I
now
type
I'm
in this
hoping
web
my
address,
team will
and I
go
get a whole bunch of links. I click and I back out,
up.
click and I back out, click and I back
Just
out.
before
10
we
minutes
brought
later, I
that
figure out
VA
what it is
type
I
B
need.
over here and got
And I
killed.
write a check.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go yonder,
I put it in the
and
envelope.
hopefully I'll get a team with me
I
over
put a
there.
stamp on the envelope. I use stamps once every
It's
5 years. To be able to
L640.
check that I write once every 5 years to these people. I then take this envelope to my mailbox.
Shows they have
put it in,
300 rounds.
Go back to the house, wait 7 to 10 working
Each
days.
time you press the bullet,
Come back to the mailbox. In there is
Shoots.
another piece of paper.
boom, boom,
I then
boom,
take
3
it to my car.
shots.
I drive to the
Boom,
license
boom,
center.
boom.
I sit in the chair.
Boom,
They
boom,
take
boom.
my picture. They give me the
Boom,
license.
boom, boom.
Total time to
Then it
transaction,
reloads
7
the
to 10
clip,
working
so it's
days.
a 12-round clip.
Now imagine if these people faced competition.
Not too accurate, but if you're close to a tank and unload into it, man.
I'd get a text.
All right, now it'll
It's time to
destroy
renew your driver's
tier
license.
1 easily, of
Click
course.
here.
It's
Now,
fair against tier 2,
And
and
it
I
would say,
can
We have your
mess
credit
around
card
with
on
tier
file.
3
Do
a
you want
bit.
to use the same credit card?
So,
Or do you want to change it?
Not
No,
all of them. Some of them I
same
can't
credit card.
even penetrate. It's true.
Put your face in the camera.
What is the
Click.
one that's
Do you
the
like
duck
the
or
picture?
something?
Yes. Hit print.
It's a French
It would print
tank.
on my printer.
AMX. French
Total time to
AMX tier
transaction
3.
30 seconds if I don't
Can't
know
even
what I'm doing.
penetrate it.
How
Not from
do I
any angle
know
or any
that
side
this
or
is
any
how it
distance.
would work? If a private
All right,
business
what do you got
were
here? You guys
handling
serious?
licenses
You're
instead of the
seriously going to
government,
wait right there?
because this is the way it works
All
everywhere
of
else. If you would like to buy,
Oh my
God knows
gosh,
why,
all
Best of
right.
Bowie, you can go to Amazon and type in the Best of Bowie, and you'll get this. It says,
You know, I don't know what to do at this
All you
point.
is
Do I?
click here, and they'll send you a CD.
But should I
Or you
turn
can
around and go
download
back
it.
and
You
hide
can
somewhere?
download
Because
it.
they're all screwing the
In 30
hell
seconds later,
up
you've got
right
this
now.
music if you want it. And this isn't even the latest technology. The latest technology is this. It's a magnet. It goes on your washing
Nice.
machine.
Good job,
And when
boys.
you are running low on
What else we got there? There we go. Okay, I see. Okay, I'm pretty toast here. I've been
your address and all of that stuff.
down to 20 points out of 170.
Up on your doorstep. Why the difference in behavior between the bureaucratic organization and the private sector organization? The difference is not because the people over here are dumb, the people over here are smart, the people over here are selfish, the people over here are out there. The difference
now we got
nothing
a
to do
fucking
with the
problem.
people. They're the same brand of Homo sapien. The difference is in the incentives. The people over here in the private sector have an incentive to put me at the center of their lives because if they don't, I will walk away. The people over here do not have the incentive to put me at the center of their lives. Therefore, they do
Should have got
what
the
any human being
BT2.
would do, what those human
He
beings would
just
love
got
to
him.
do, but can't. They put themselves at the center of their lives.
All right.
And so you
See,
get
those
things
little
like
tanks just die real
bargaining,
quick and real easy. That's
descriptions of forms
just a
that have to
thing.
be filled out, and parking
Or you can
spaces that
do
are
it.
reserved for the people who work here.
bigger, heavier tank.
So the problem here is fundamentally, bureaucrats behave the way
Is
they
tier
do.
5
for
the
two
highest
reasons.
I have
One,
on this
there's no
account?
profit motive. If they behave well, they don't get increased profits. With they,
Alright,
they
tier
get
6 is the
If they
highest I've
behave
got.
Poorly, they don't incur losses.
I have tier
that
8
now
on other
cause
accounts.
their
I'm not really
stockholders to
excited
come
about
down on top of them.
getting more
And there's
tier
no
8s
competition.
because they're boring.
There's nowhere else for people to go. Therefore,
And
you
I
get
wonder
this
if tier 10
natural
is
behavior
actually any
economy
good at
that
all because
does this
now
mean
this one I
ultimately
haven't
the
even
government can't make
battled
good
in. This is
decisions?
a tier
That,
4.
I believe, is the wrong question.
Never
the right
battled
question
once in it.
Is because humans in both the private and the public sector are fallible. They will make errors. The right question is not who's going to avoid making errors.
Alright, so I need
The right question is when they
quite a
do
bit
make errors,
there.
because they
Alright.
will. Who has the
And-
greater incentive to identify and correct
No,
those
no,
errors?
no. I'm not gonna buy any of that
And
garbage for
economists will
Brandon.
argue that
Everything's
often,
good. We got bullets. Okay.
perhaps all of the
Alright,
time,
let's battle.
the answer is people in the private sector. because they
M5A1
must
Stewart,
respond
an American
to
tank,
loss
open on the
incentives
top,
because their
susceptible to
customers can
certain
walk away.
types of
So the moral of the
flash
story is,
burst
look, be
rounds
careful
or
what
whatever
you
they
wish for. When you see a problem and you say, if only the government would. Because in reality, we face all kinds of problems like rational ignorance, gerrymandering.
Is this guy just trying to talk the average Joe out of his statist?
These wonderful things you imagine that will happen when you
He's
say
just talking to Democrats and
often
Republicans?
don't happen at all.
Because an anarchist sent me this video we're listening to as a way to get me started in thinking. I love it when they say shit on here. He said Obama, I said sucks. So yeah, we can do this all day. Come on, guys. Alright, I don't know what the next video's coming up is, so now we're in trouble.
Myths about the government debt. Myth number 1, the government owes $20 trillion. How much is $20 trillion? Suppose you go to Germany, and in Germany, you go to every town, and in every town, you visit every store, and in every store, you look at every shelf and grab everything that is for sale. The amount of money you spend will not be $20 trillion. If you go to Germany and then to France, and you go to every town, and within every town, you go to every store, and every store, you look at every shelf, and you buy everything.
Okay,
You
what are you
still
doing,
will not
guys?
have
There's
spent
nobody
$20
coming?
trillion.
You stupid
You
cowards.
can
We're
go
gonna
to
lose
England,
quick.
and while you're there, you can go to the North countries and
You
buy everything.
morons.
that's
What are
for
they
sale,
doing?
And you still will not have spent $20 trillion.
Oh, this is real
In fact,
solid,
to spend
guys.
$20
Real
trillion,
solid.
you have to go to every country in Europe.
Oh, I hate
Visit
it when
every
teams
town,
are
in
like
every
this.
town, go to every store, in every store, look on every
hate
shelf and
teams
buy
like this.
everything. And then you will have
Stupid
spent
cowards.
about $20 trillion. But the myth is that this is how much money the government owes. It turns out that there's more, called unfunded obligations.
I hope they lose. I
Unfunded
don't want them to
obligations
win.
is
Come
money
on,
the
you
federal
morons.
government has promised.
Stupid. What are you
but
going to
which it
sit
does
at
not
the
and will not
flag
have
the
the money
whole
to pay.
time?
Largely,
Or
this
what is sit at
consists
the
of promises
flag?
of
All of you go one
retirement
way and the
and
rest of you
medical
sit at the
benefits.
flag.
If you take
Very brave.
the present value of all the future promises of
Type
retirement and
91,
medical
you're a
benefits
little bit
the
late there,
government has
buddy.
made, and subtract from
I don't
that
really care
the
what you're
amount of
doing
money
now.
that's in the government's Social Security and Medicare trust funds, and then subtract from that
Sometimes you
the
can
amount of
salvage
money
a
the
shit-ass
federal
team
government
like this, but
anticipates collecting under the current law
usually they'll...
from future Social Security and Medicare
Look at all these
taxes.
guys camping back here.
You'll
Look
still
at
have an
this.
amount of money left over that
Push
the government
forward,
does
you
not have.
morons.
And
Oh,
that's
what a
the
bunch of
unfunded obligation,
cowards.
an amount of money the government has promised, which it
Oh
does
my
not and
gosh.
will not have the money to pay. Estimates of unfunded obligations vary from the astronomical to the unbelievable. On the low end, People have estimated unfunded obligations to be about $80 trillion, on the high end, 200 trillion.
Everybody's just camping there at
the federal government's total financial obligations range
Silly.
somewhere from 100 to 220 trillion dollars. Let's say, roughly speaking, the federal government owes about 150 trillion dollars. Myth number 2, the government owes 150 trillion dollars. Well, it turns out there's more to it. There are federal agencies that don't appear on the federal government's budget. There are government-sponsored enterprises like Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac that don't appear on the government's financial statements, and they owe another $8 trillion. There's then state and local
I found
governments
a lot of
that
them out here.
collectively owe about
Yeah, this is a
$3 trillion
fucking
and have
camping
another $5
loser
trillion
team.
in their
God,
own
look at 'em
unfunded
all over there in
obligations. So when we put it all together,
Corner, huddled
the
up together, a
total
whole
U.S.
group of them.
governmental financial obligations total about $165 trillion. Myth number 3. Government borrowed from the Social Security Trust Fund isn't really
I think
debt
this
because
guy's
we
got a
owe it to
machine gun.
ourselves. Well, it turns out there is no ourselves here.
Yep,
The
and I don't
trust
want to
fund
upgrade it,
belongs
even though I
to
could
current and future
upgrade
retirees. So
something else.
when people retire and the
Loops.
government does not have the money that it has promised them, one of two things must happen. Either the government must increase taxes on future workers to pay for the Social Security and Medicare obligations it has promised, or the government has to cut the promised Social Security and Medicare benefits that it had promised to retirees. Either way, someone must pay. Myth number 4, the government can't go bankrupt. This is technically true because the government promised to pay back a certain number of dollar bills. And so as the government starts to run out of money, it can simply print more, thereby satisfying its obligations. But while that's technically true, it's effectively false, because when the government prints money, it erodes the purchasing power of dollars, thereby creating inflation. For example, suppose you have a bunch of people, and these people buy things. They buy things from Walmart, from McDonald's, and Ford, and in buying these things, they give these businesses money. In return, they receive goods and services from
All
these
right,
businesses.
how's this going to go?
The ratio of the dollars they pay to the goods and services they receive, we call prices. So we have the average price of a hamburger, the average price of a pair of shoes, the average price of a car. Now, if the government were to print enough money to double the money supply, we would have twice as many dollar bills floating around, but the same amount of goods and services. All that would happen is the prices of these goods and services themselves would double. So with twice as many dollar bills, a hamburger now goes from a price of $4 to a price of $8. The car goes from $30,000 to a price of $60,000. And one of the prices
What kind of gun is that? Oh, it's a Luke's. I'm not going to hit anything from back here.
Interestingly, you're left with the following.
Forgot what I
Under
was driving.
scenario 1,
I'm dead.
without the
I
government
don't know how to
money,
play this
let's
tank.
suppose you earn $50,000 a year,
I never do
and the
play
price
this
of a
tank.
hamburger, shoes, and a car, things you would buy, are $4,
Takes
$30, and
forever to
$30,000.
reload, huh?
And then along
Jesus
comes the
Christ,
government
a
and prints
machine
lots of
gun
money,
takes
and in
20
printing the money, it
seconds to
doubles all
reload.
the prices, including your
Probably
income.
because it's a new tank.
So now in scenario 2, you're earning twice as much as you were before, $100,000, but the prices of the things you buy have all doubled as well. And so if I ask you, are you better off in scenario 1 or scenario 2? The answer is you're the same in both. It doesn't matter to you whether you're earning $50,000 and a car costs $30,000, or whether you're earning $100,000 and a car costs $60,000. It's the same car. Now, there is a difference in the two scenarios, and the difference shows up when you look at your savings. Let's suppose in scenario 1, you had $10,000 in savings. You're earning $50,000 and a hamburger costs $4,000. Along comes the government, it prints money, and in printing money, all the prices double. That means that the hamburger now costs twice as much, the shoes cost twice as much, you're earning twice as much, but your savings...
Reloading, just let me reload. Let
It's
me
the
reload.
same $10,000 sitting in savings. And what has happened when the government
Damn
no
it,
longer
still
prints
didn't
money? In effect, what it's doing is draining away the purchasing power of your savings. So economists say it this way: inflation is a tax on savings. When the government prints money and thereby creates inflation, we get the same exact effect as if the government had imposed a tax on people's savings. So the fact is that the government ultimately pays for bankruptcy by taxing the purchasing power of people's savings. Myth number 5, the government can solve its financial problems by raising taxes. Well, it turns out the government can't raise taxes at all. It can only raise tax rates. Taxes are what happens when the tax rate the government imposes interacts with people's behavior. This is perhaps the most interesting picture in all of economics. And it's interesting precisely because it's so boring. What you're seeing here is federal tax receipts. This is all tax revenue from all sources combined: payroll taxes, income taxes, estate taxes, tariffs, everything. Federal taxes, all sources combined, as a fraction of GDP. And what you see is
before we got in trouble because they didn't.
This has remained relatively
they didn't come over and defend
about
this.
17%. That is, over time,
they're probably all going to camp there no matter what. Their team.
The government has collected a
so I'm going to try to push my team up there. So I've got a fast tank.
Now, let's superimpose on top of this,
try to get past that
the top marginal income tax rate. So back in the 1950s, the top marginal income tax rate.
This guy sounds like he's just addressing regular Americans and trying to get some reason into their head.
Goes back up during Bush the first, comes back down, goes back up again. This is the top marginal income tax rate. So we talk about
this is like
taxing
introductory stuff I'd give to a 14-year-old to try to get them to start thinking about
in years in which we
these
tax the rich at a very high rate, the government collected 17% of the economy as tax revenue. And in years in which we lowered the tax rate on the rich, the government still collected 17% of the economy as tax revenue.
I would like to go further and faster and farther, but I don't have anybody with me yet.
When capital gains taxes were particularly high, the government collected 70% of the economy as tax revenue. When capital gains taxes were particularly low, the government collected 17% of the economy as tax revenue.
This guy's on a suicide mission, Stoke here.
Corporate tax rate. When corporations paid higher fractions of their profits to the federal government collected 17% of the economy as tax revenue. When tax rates on corporations were lower, the government still collected the same 17% of the economy as tax revenue. It didn't matter whether we taxed the rich or capital gains or corporations. It didn't matter whether we taxed them a high amount or we taxed them a low amount.
Make sure I'm safe. Okay. Not really, but kind of good.
It has consistently collected the same 17% of the economy as tax revenue. Now, you might say, all right, but we're looking at tax revenue as a fraction of GDP. Tell me what's happening to tax revenue straight up. So let's look at what happens to tax revenue as tax rates change. What you see here is the top marginal income tax rate. This is data from 1940 to 2015. So
wow, this is the slowest gun. Oh, my ammo rack's
damaged. At a higher rate. As we move to the left, we're taxing the rich at a lower rate. Up and
down,
my
leopard should have reloaded faster, but my ammo rack was damaged.
1 year later. So this is total federal tax revenue on a per capita basis 1 year after the tax rate goes into effect. And this is all adjusted for inflation. The story we hear when we hear things like, well, we need more tax revenue, so we need to tax the rich more. Implicit in that statement is if you increase the tax rate on the rich, we will collect more tax revenue. But if we actually look at the data, what we see is a different picture. The actual data looks like this. On average, as we have increased the tax rate on the rich,
I'll have a quick run with this. These make money and they're cheap to fix, so you got to play them once in a while to make money.
Tax revenue. There are exceptions to this, but there's also a very clear trend that the tax revenue moves in the opposite direction that we think it should. And this is not just true of the top marginal income tax rate. We also see it if we look at the capital gains tax rate. Now, the relationship here is not as tight, but it's disturbingly in the same direction. On average, as the government has increased the capital gains tax rate, 1 year later, it has collected less tax revenue than it did before. We see the same phenomenon with the corporate profits tax. We see the same thing with the estate tax. In fact, of all the federal taxes, I'm only aware of two, which historically, as the government has increased these tax rates, its tax revenue has actually gone up. And those two taxes are Social Security and Medicare. The disturbing part of this is these are the taxes that fall most heavily on the poor and the middle class. Myth number 6, the rich aren't paying their fair share. What constitutes a fair share? What you see here is average market income of various income groups in the United States as of 2013. So we have the poorest 20% of Americans at the top. Their market income, that is income they earn from participating in market activities as opposed to money the government gives them. Their market income is about $15,800 on average. Here's the middle income Americans. Their average income is about $53,000, and the top 1% just over $1.5 million. So let's ask, what is a fair tax rate for these people to pay? As we talk about tax rates, let's talk about effective tax rates. And what I mean by that is, after you have done all of your legal and accounting gymnastics, write-offs and deductions and exemptions, when all that's finished, what fraction of your income did you end up paying to the IRS? That's the effective tax rate.
Wow, 1, 2, 3, 4.
We can argue about what
more in the hills.
Fair. A lot of people tend to answer the following way.
We got a team here.
The poor should probably pay somewhere around 2%. A lot of people think that the middle class Americans should pay around 15%. And a lot of people think that the top 1% should pay around 30% of their income as taxes. Now, we can argue about whether these things are indeed fair, but this seems to be
nicely done, boys.
People tend to agree with. So let's look at what these groups actually pay. If we look at the federal taxes collected from each of these groups, we see something like the following. The average household amongst the poorest 20% of Americans pays, on average, $800 in federal taxes. The average middle income household in the United States pays about $9,000 in taxes, and the average household amongst the top 1% pays about $500,000 in federal taxes. Now, this isn't the end of the story.
What's going on?
Because we don't just pay money to the federal government also gives money back. A lot of this comes in the form of the Earned Income Tax Credit, or Social Security benefits, or unemployment compensation. But all of these things are instances in which the government has first collected money and then turned around and given the money back. So let's account for this, and economists call this transfers. Transfers are money the government gives to people. The average household amongst the poorest 20%.
Town's looking pretty rough. We gotta move, boys. Come on.
About $9,600
there we go.
In 2013.
The
average middle-income household received about $16,700. The average top 1% earned about $800. Most of that is likely coming from Social Security retirement benefits.
Run to the flag.
But notice what happens now. If we calculate the
effective
tax rate by accounting not just for what people pay to the government, but for the money the government pays them back, what we find is something astounding. We claimed that a fair tax rate for the poorest
Excelsior and a P43 are holding the city? Holy crap, I wonder what's in the city. Oh, pans are okay. Maybe they can be okay. Excelsior is garbage, though.
That is, when all the dust settles, they're actually receiving more money back from the federal government than they paid in the first place.
That's not good.
Making their effective tax
rate
below zero. This is true all the way up through middle-income America. The average middle-income American is receiving back 15% more from the federal government than he paid in. The top 1% are paying about 34%. And here we have an interesting conclusion. On average, and there are exceptions, but on average, only the top 40% are net payers into the federal government. And this raises an interesting point, because every time someone says, well, we should cut taxes, someone else responds with, well, you mean tax cuts for the rich.
Archer,
but in fact,
for the
our tax system, at least at the federal level, has become so progressive that virtually every tax cut, by definition, is a tax cut for the rich, because on average, those are the only people who are actually paying. Myth number 7, the government can settle its debts by selling off its assets. The government has debts and unfunded obligations, about $150 trillion.
Two more guys, one of them's in town.
8,000 tons of gold in Fort Knox, 500 million acres of land out in the West and Midwest, and then miscellaneous assets on top of that.
Now,
and these total actually only about $2 or $3 trillion.
What are they going to do?
So when we're done,
what's my team going to do?
Is
somebody going to cap with me?
All of his assets, we still have a shortfall of $147 trillion. Myth number 8, the government needs to pay off its debts. The good news here is the government actually doesn't need to pay off its debt. Just as a household with a credit card does not have to pay off its credit card, all it has to do is keep up with the minimum monthly payments. So too, the government only needs to keep up with its minimum monthly payments. We call this servicing the debt. The bad news is, if we count all of the money the federal government owes, $150 trillion, and the federal government currently pays about 2.5% on its debt, to service the full $150 trillion of obligations, the federal government would have to come up with $3.8 trillion per year.
Oh, maybe I got enough to buy
That is To service the debt and obligations the federal government currently has, it would have to pay $3.8 trillion a year in interest. And yet, the federal government's annual income is only about $3.3 trillion. That is, the federal government actually is bankrupt right now. Even if it were to devote all of the tax revenue it collects solely to servicing its $150 trillion in debt and obligations, it still would not have enough money to service that debt. Myth number 9, well, the government could just keep on borrowing. The problem here is the government has borrowed so much money that it's running out of places to find more. Currently, the American people, state and local governments have loaned about $6 trillion to the federal government. Social Security, Medicare, Veterans Benefits Trust Funds have loaned about $5 trillion to the federal government. Foreign governments have loaned another $4 trillion. The Federal Reserve has loaned $3 trillion, and foreign people have loaned about $2 trillion. This is the total amount of money that people the world over have loaned to the federal government. The problem with this is Social Security, Medicare, Veterans Benefits Trust Funds have run out of money.
I'm going around.
They have no more left to loan to the federal government. In fact, in the case of Social Security and Medicare,
two Lukes going with me.
Back
what we're going to do is we're going to break through.
The federal government,
2 Lukes and a T67. We're going to break through. We're going to lose.
Benefits.
Holy crap! Why is everybody going this way?
People have been slowing the growth of their lending to the federal government. The American people, state and local governments have been slowing, in some cases, actually cutting back on how much they loan the federal government. And that means that as time moves forward and the federal government wants to borrow more and more money, and these groups are all tending to cut back on how much they loan, the one place left the federal government can turn to for money is the Federal Reserve. And the problem here is when the government borrows from the Federal Reserve, unlike its borrowing from any of these other groups, it creates inflation. And inflation is a tax on savings. So in effect, as the federal government runs out of places to borrow, it must turn to the Federal Reserve to borrow money. And when it does that, it creates inflation, which erodes the purchasing power of all of our savings. Myth number 10, there's no way to fix this problem. It turns out that there is. We could have a balanced budget within 5 years if we followed this recipe. First, cut all spending this year by 10%, no exceptions. And if there's some things you don't want to cut by 10%, then cut something else by more, so that when you're done, in total, you have cut by 10%. And when I say cut by 10%, I mean the word in the way any normal human being uses it. When politicians say cut the budget, what they mean is to increase the budget by less than they would actually like. This is an actual 10% cut. We spend 10% less than we did the year before. Then hold spending constant for 4 years. Don't even adjust for inflation. What happens over
I'm just trying to push my guys to come forward. I know it's not a good idea, but they're just going to sit there doing nothing. Do something.
And at the end of the 5th year,
yeah. All right. See, I got Luke's to come with me. Good.
That it can support the government that exists.
Because somebody's got to do something.
We'll have our first balance budget.
Can't just sit there with 5 guys and not pass with no opposition. There was nobody opposing.
Provided that the increase does not outpace the growth rate of the economy as a whole. This solution stops the bleeding. It prevents the debt problem from getting worse, but it doesn't solve the debt problem. However, we can grow out of this. It took perhaps 100 years for our debt problem to grow to the size it is now. If we can stop the problem from getting worse over the course of the next 50 or 100 years, the economy will grow enough that the current $150 trillion debt won't matter. Myths about inequality. Myth number 1, profit and plunder are the same thing. Imagine a person who provides services to society. Maybe he mows lawns or fixes cars or paints houses. And in return for these services he provides to others, he asks for something in return, maybe some food, clothing, and shelter. Now, suppose it's the case that the society values what this person provides tremendously. Maybe because these are things that society really needs, or maybe because there are very few people who are able to do these things. but for whatever reason, society places a great value on the things this person contributes. And let's suppose also that society places a relatively low value on the things that he asks for in return. Perhaps it's because these things are easy to produce, there's lots of them laying around. For whatever reason, imagine this society places a low value on the resources this person asks for in exchange. We would look at this person and say, this is a person who we would like to have. He contributes more to society than he asks for in return. But now take this person and superimpose on top of him a monetary system where instead of exchanging the things he does for society's resources,
So what are you guys
he
doing?
exchanges
Oh,
the
they got
things he does for money and uses the money to buy resources from others. This is what this would look like. The person provides value to society, and society gives him dollars in return. And the dollars are commensurate with the value that society places on these things he offers. Society highly values the services, and so people are willing to pay him a lot of money for these services. And then in return, the person takes some of this money that he's earned and he buys resources from society. And because society does not place a large value on the things he's asking for in return, they don't ask for much money for these. And so if you look at the system, what's happening is that the person is accumulating dollars. He will have more dollars coming in than there are dollars going out. And we call this profit. Now, many people look at profit and say that profit is in some sense a bad thing because it represents something someone is taking from society. But if you look at it in this context, profit is actually an indication that this person has done something good, that he has provided more value to others than he has asked for in exchange.
All right, we're gonna need somebody to
And so
take care of
as he
that guy
provides
for
this
us.
value and asks for things in exchange, he accumulates these dollar bills. We call them profit. Steve Jobs died with $80 billion in the bank. And he's an example of this person. Where did Jobs come up with this $80 billion? He came up with the $80 billion because these people liked the things he was offering better than they liked the dollars in their pocket. And so they gave dollars to Steve Jobs, and Steve Jobs gave iPhones to the people. This was the transaction. At the end, Steve Jobs dies with lots of money in the bank, but the world ends up with lots of iPhones as the other half of the exchange. Profit is not a sign that people need to give back to society. In fact, it's the reverse. Profit, when attained in a free market environment, is a sign that society actually owes the person more goods and services than he has already consumed. Now, suppose, conversely, the person accumulates dollars not by offering goods and services to society, but instead by co-opting the government and using the force of government to take money from others and put it in his own pocket. Then in that case, we have this kind of situation where the person just simply is using the force of government to take money from the people. The person then uses some of this money to buy goods and services, and maybe he has some left over, but this, although it looks like the same pile of dollar bills, we no longer call profit, we now call it plunder. Because although it's the same pile of dollar bills, how the person came about those dollar bills is very different. He did not come about them by offering someone something in free exchange for something else. Instead, he came about them by co-opting the power of government to take money from others. We have plenty of examples of this. The agricultural lobby lobbies government for things like ethanol requirements, despite the fact that there are many studies showing that ethanol is not necessarily good for the environment. It does not give you better gas mileage. It doesn't reduce our dependence on foreign oil, and yet big industries will lobby the government for ethanol requirements because these industries make their money from growing corn. And so what happens is these large industries collect lots of money in exchange for providing people with nothing in return. This is the difference between profit and plunder. So myth number one, profit and plunder are the same thing. The fact is, profit is good. It indicates someone has provided something for society. Plunder is not. It indicates that someone has actually taken something from society. Myth number two, one can be for equality. These three kids face equal opportunities, although unequal outcomes. Each one stands on a box. They have equality of opportunity, but because they are different heights, one can see the game, one can't. They have inequality of outcome. These three kids face equality of outcome, but inequality of opportunity. One has 2 boxes, one has no boxes. Their opportunities are unequal, despite the fact that all 3 can see the game. Their outcome is equal. So the moral of the story is you cannot be for or against equality. You can only be for or against a particular combination of equality and inequality. If you are for equality of opportunity, then by definition, you are also against equality of outcome. And if you are for equality of outcome, then by definition, you are also against equality of opportunity. And the reason for this is because people are different. Some people are born smarter than others. Some people are born luckier than others. Some people are born faster or stronger than others. And because people are born into different circumstances, when we leave them alone, we give them equality of opportunity. Some will naturally rise higher than others, and we will have inequality of outcome. And in fact, because people are different, the only way to achieve equality of outcome is to impose an inequality of opportunity, to boost the people who are less smart, less skilled, less educated, and hold back.
You can't boost anybody.
So
you just have to hold back.
For equality, the fact is that equality and inequality are actually inseparable. You can only be for a combination. Myth number 3.
That's the
we
stupidest
understand
thing
what
I've heard all
inequality
day.
means. These children are suffering. They're not suffering because they're unequal.
Combination. So that just means he's a pragmatist about the subject. He sees there's a problem with the subject. He's just a pragmatist about it. All right, I hate this map of artillery. Why did I play artillery? I hate artillery.
The real problem being poverty. Look at these people. Let's suppose that the people on the left earn $30,000. These people earn 40. Those are
I'm going Hill. I don't care what everybody else.
$70,000. We can look at this and we see that there's lots of inequality here. But imagine that these people are in different stages of their careers. The people on the left have just started their jobs. The people in the middle are mid-level career people. These are people on the right who have spent lots of time in the workforce. They've achieved lots of education, lots of experience, and commensurately high incomes. To the left of these people are students who are learning skills and preparing to enter the workforce. We have inequality here. And if I move time forward, you will see that this inequality persists. Always we have inequality. People on the left earning less, people on the right earning more. However, over time,
people on the left earning less. Really? I thought the left owned the unions and the schools and the universities.
A total of $200,000. That is, in this example, we have persistent inequality.
Oh, it's probably a graph.
And yet everyone is okay. That's not to say that there is no such thing as inequality of outcome, but it is to say that when we talk about inequality,
all right, I've got nobody. I need to have scouts in front of me, and I need to have tanks with me, and I've got neither.
Look at the inequality.
That is
when
not
the right way to do this is to look over time.
If the enemy takes this hill, we're toast.
How people move, some from the poor to the rich, some of the rich move down to the poor, and if we look over time, we will still
hopefully
see
the enemy are just as cowardly as
markedly less
my team here
than we see when we just take a snapshot. Steve Jobs, as we said, died with $8 billion in the bank, and he got his money from people like Clip Art Woman, who handed it over to him in exchange for iThings. Now, when we talk about inequality, we focus on the flow of the dollars. We completely ignore the flow of the goods and services. Next time you're in a crowd of people, ask for a show of hands. How many people here have at least $50,000 in the bank? And you will find very few hands going up. Then ask, how many people here have a smartphone? And you'll see every hand go up. Notice the difference. When we look at dollars, we will tend to see inequality. But if we look at the goods and services that arise in response to those dollars, we'll actually see tremendous equality. Economists measure inequality on the Gini index. 0 means everybody's equal. 1 means one person is incredibly rich and everybody else is destitute. The 2 most equal countries in the world are Sweden and Afghanistan. On the Gini index, they rank 0.25 and 0.28. In terms of planet Earth, this is as equal in income as countries can get. And yet, if you look at these 2 countries, what you will find is that the average income in Sweden is $54,000, while the average income in Afghanistan
what a loser
is $600.
team.
That is, equality doesn't necessarily mean that we're all well off. We can be equally miserable. So problems with inequality. First, inequality diverts our attention to a real problem, the real problem being poverty. Second, people can be unequal persistently and yet perfectly equal if we look at them over time. Third, inequality ignores completely half of the economy by focusing on dollars, not goods and services. And then finally, when we're done, equality isn't necessarily good anyway. So myth number 3 is we understand inequality, and the fact is most of us actually don't. We confuse it for equality exists at one point in time for equality that actually is much less over time, and at the end we actually end up thinking equality is necessarily good when in fact it may not be. Myth number 4, the middle class is disappearing. This is the distribution of households in the United States in 1970. All the numbers here are adjusted for inflation. The height of the bar is not income, it's the fraction of households that exist in the income level. So here we have what today we would call less than $15,000. And in 1970, about 15% of US households had incomes that would be the equivalent of what today we call less than $15,000. And in 1970, about 10% had $15,000 to $25,000 of income. The largest percentage of households were in the $50,000 to $75,000 range. And then what you see is way over here, very few households, about 1% in 1970, earned what today we would call more than $200,000. That's the United States in 1970. Now let's move forward 10 years. Here's 1980,
Jesus.
and you see slightly fewer households
Great.
in this poorest category.
Where did all the tanks and all the scouts go? Couldn't send anybody over to take the hill?
Have more in the rich
Got
category.
more important things to do than the
This
hill.
is 1980. Here's 1990, 2000,
Morons.
2010. And the last year's data is currently available, 2013. And notice a pattern here. As we look at the fraction of households in each income category,
Hopefully they'll win, but they're going to have to slug it out because they don't have the
we
territory.
see far fewer households in this lowest category, about the same in this category, and a little bit less here. So in total,
All right,
amongst
this is
the
gonna have to
low
be it.
income categories, we have fewer
I
American
can't actually
households
stand the
today
thought of
than
going
we
back
did
in there again.
1970. In the middle income households, we have less. Fewer households in this category, fewer households in
All
this
right,
category.
ladies and gentlemen, if
about
you
the same
suffered
here.
through that, I
Amongst
don't even know if this
middle-income
worked.
Americans,
Now I'm
there
going to go
are
see if it
fewer
works.
households
Thank you
than there
for
were in
watching.
1970.